In the dusty town of Willow Creek, where the sunsets painted the skies in golden red and the saloons echoed with laughter and country tunes, lived a young woman named Clara. She worked at the small general store on Main Street, selling everything from flour to gunpowder. Clara was quiet but clever, with eyes sharp enough to notice what others often missed. Most people in town liked her for her kindness and calm nature, though few really knew her well. One afternoon, the door of the store swung open with the sound of spurs clinking on the wooden floor. A cowboy walked in, tall, rugged, and dressed in worn-out leather boots. His name was Luke Carson, a drifter who rode from one town to another doing odd jobs. His blue eyes carried both confidence and a touch of mischief. He tipped his hat as he entered and said, "Afternoon, ma'am. You got any coffee beans left?" Clara nodded and went to fetch the beans from the back shelf. Luke watched her as she moved, calm, graceful, and with that air of quiet strength that made her seem different from other women he had met. But his thoughts began to wander in ways he didn't mean them to. He admired her smile, the way the sunlight touched her hair, and before he could stop himself, he was lost in thoughts that would have made him blush if anyone could read them. What Luke didn't know was that Clara had a strange gift. She could sense people's thoughts when their emotions grew strong. She had learned to control it, to block it out when she could, but sometimes the thoughts came to her whether she wanted them or not. When she handed Luke the bag of coffee beans, a flicker of his thoughts slipped through. She froze for a second, surprised, then hid her reaction behind a polite smile. Luke noticed her pause and felt his face heat up. He realized she might have caught on to something, his expression, maybe his lingering stare, and he quickly looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry if I stared too long," he said awkwardly. "Didn't mean any offense, ma'am." Clara wanted to laugh. His embarrassment was so genuine, so innocent, that it softened her heart. She smiled, gentle and warm. "It's all right, Mr. Carson," she said softly. "You didn't do any harm." But deep inside, Clara was amused. She wasn't angry, just curious. It had been a long time since someone's thoughts had come to her so clearly, and even longer since someone's mind had been so easy to read. Luke wasn't a bad man. His thoughts were simple, almost boyish. Beneath his rough look was a kind soul, and that made her smile linger a little longer than usual. Luke noticed that smile and felt his heart skip. He didn't know why, but he wanted to keep talking to her. "You been working here long?" he asked, pretending to browse through the shelf of canned goods. "Most of my life," she replied. "My father owned this place before me. Now it's mine to run." "Must be a lot of work," he said, glancing around. She nodded. "It keeps me busy and out of trouble." He chuckled softly. "That's a good thing in a town like this. Trouble likes to ride in uninvited." Their small talk continued as the sunlight outside turned to a warm orange glow. The town was quiet except for a few horses snorting and children playing near the well. Inside the store, time seemed to slow. Luke leaned on the counter, his earlier embarrassment fading into easy conversation. Clara found herself enjoying it more than she expected. As Luke paid for his coffee and a few other things, his hand brushed hers for just a second. It wasn't planned, but both of them felt the spark of the moment. Clara looked up, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, she felt that odd connection between what she heard in his thoughts and what she saw in his face. He was a man who carried loneliness under his laughter, someone who had traveled too far too often without finding a place to belong. When Luke stepped out into the street, the evening wind picked up dust from the road. He turned back once to look at her through the window. She was standing by the counter, lost in thought. He wondered what she might be thinking, and for some reason he hoped she was thinking of him. Clara, on the other hand, stood quietly, still feeling the echo of his thoughts in her mind. She knew it was wrong to peek into someone's feelings, even accidentally. But his honesty, his awkward apology, and his shy smile made her heart feel lighter than it had in months. Later that night, she sat by her window, watching the stars stretch across the dark sky. The world outside was quiet except for the faint sound of horses in the distance. She thought about Luke, about how his thoughts had reached her without him saying a word. She wondered if she would see him again, though she told herself it didn't matter. But deep inside, she already knew she wanted to. And miles away, in a small camp by the river, Luke sat beside his horse, sipping his coffee and thinking about the woman with the gentle eyes who smiled even after he made a fool of himself. He had met many people on his travels, but something about her felt different, like she could see right through him, yet didn't judge what she saw. He smiled faintly to himself, staring into the fire. "Guess I owe her more than an apology," he muttered under his breath. The wind carried the faint scent of wild sage through the night as both of them, miles apart, thought about each other. The cowboy who spoke little but felt deeply, and the young woman who could read thoughts yet kept her heart guarded. Neither of them knew it yet. But their paths were set to cross again, and the next time they met, it wouldn't just be thoughts that were read, it would be truths, regrets, and the wild, unexpected kindness that only life in the West could teach. Days passed in Willow Creek, but Clara could not get the cowboy out of her mind. Every time she arranged cans on the shelves or swept the dust from the store floor, his face came back to her thoughts, that shy smile, those honest eyes, and the way he had looked so guilty after realizing what had crossed his mind. It wasn't that she was angry. In fact, she found the memory strangely sweet. Luke had seemed like someone who carried stories deeper than his words could tell, and she had felt something real in that short meeting. One morning, as Clara unlocked the store door, she noticed a folded paper slipped under the entrance. It was a small note written in rough handwriting. It said, "Thank you for not thinking bad of me that day. I'm riding out to Redstone for a few days, but I hope to stop by again if you'll allow it. Luke Carson." Clara smiled softly, holding the note in her hand for a long time. His words were simple but full of sincerity. She tucked it safely under the counter, telling herself it didn't mean anything, but deep down, she was already waiting for the day he would return. Weeks passed. The town's life carried on as usual. Trains whistled in the distance, cattle wagons rolled down the dusty roads, and folks stopped by the store for supplies. Yet every sunset, Clara found herself glancing down the road, half expecting to see that familiar cowboy hat in the distance. Then one hot afternoon, when the wind carried the scent of dry sagebrush, the sound of hooves echoed through town. Clara looked up and saw Luke riding in. He looked tired, covered in dust from travel, but his smile was still the same. When he entered the store, she felt something warm rise in her chest. "Afternoon, Miss Clara," he said, tipping his hat. "Hope I ain't showing up uninvited." "You're always welcome," she replied softly. "How was Redstone?" He grinned. "Rough roads, tough work, but decent pay. Got a few blisters to prove it." She laughed quietly. "You look like you've seen half the desert." "Maybe I have," he said, brushing the dust off his coat. "But I missed your coffee beans more than the pay." They both laughed, and the tension that might have existed before vanished like a passing cloud. Clara offered him a cup of coffee from the small stove she kept behind the counter. They sat at a wooden table near the window, watching people go by as they talked about the weather, the ranchers, and small-town life. As the evening light turned golden, Luke grew quiet for a moment. His gaze fell to the table and he spoke in a softer tone. "You know, I ain't one to talk much about my life, but sometimes, riding all those empty miles makes a man think too much. Feels like the road keeps getting longer the more you travel it." Clara listened carefully, her kind eyes steady on him. "Maybe the road isn't the problem," she said gently. "Maybe it's just waiting for you to find where you belong." Luke looked at her, and in that moment her words touched something deep inside him. No one had ever said something like that to him before. He had met plenty of people, but no one had spoken with such quiet understanding. He smiled faintly and said, "Maybe I already did." For a long moment they didn't speak. The light from the window fell softly across her face, and she felt the warmth of his sincerity. She didn't need to read his thoughts to know what he meant. She could feel it in his voice, in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, Luke kept visiting the store. Sometimes he'd help her carry supplies, fix the old shelves, or sweep the porch without being asked. He became a familiar face in town, and people began to like him. The other townsfolk noticed how Clara smiled more when he was around, though she pretended not to. One evening, a summer storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned dark and thunder echoed over the hills. Luke was still in town when the rain began to pour. Clara told him he could wait it out inside the store. The two sat by the lamp, watching the rain fall like silver threads outside the window. "You ever think about leaving this town?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes," she said, stirring her tea. "But I wouldn't know where to go. My life is here. My father built this place. It feels like a part of me." Luke nodded slowly. "I used to think I'd never settle anywhere. But I reckon even a man like me needs a place that feels like home." She looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. "And have you found that place yet?" He hesitated, then smiled gently. "Maybe I have, and if the person in it doesn't mind a drifter hanging around." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the rain, then turned back to him and said softly, "Sometimes home isn't a place. Luke, it's the people we meet who make us feel safe." For a moment, the storm outside faded into silence. They just sat there, the air between them calm and peaceful. It wasn't a loud confession or a grand moment, just two souls who finally understood each other. When the rain stopped, Luke stood up and walked to the door. "I'll be riding out again soon," he said. "Got work up north, but I'll come back if you'll let me." Clara smiled, her voice quiet but certain. "I'll be here." He nodded, tipping his hat before stepping out into the damp street. The smell of wet earth filled the air as he mounted his horse. He glanced back once, meeting her eyes through the window. She waved, and he rode off into the fading evening. Months later, Clara stood outside her store one morning watching the horizon. Life had returned to its normal rhythm. Customers came and went, children ran past with laughter, and the sun climbed high above the golden plains. But she still thought about him, wondering if he would keep his promise. Then one day, as the dust rose on the far road, she saw a familiar figure riding toward town. Her heart leapt before her mind caught up. It was Luke, his hat tilted low, his horse moving at a steady pace. He looked different, stronger, but the same gentle smile was there. When he dismounted and walked up to her, she didn't say a word. She simply smiled. That same smile she had given him the first day they met, when she had read his thoughts and seen the goodness in his heart. Luke took off his hat and said softly, "Told you I'd come back." "I never doubted you," she replied. He laughed quietly, his eyes full of warmth. "You still read minds, Miss Clara?" She smiled wider. "Not anymore. Some things I'd rather feel than read." They stood there for a long moment, the wind carrying the sound of the prairie around them. There was no need for more words. Two lonely people had found something worth keeping, not through fancy talk or wild dreams, but through honesty, kindness, and the unspoken bond that had begun with a single shy apology. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with gold and red once more, Luke helped Clara close up the store. The old bell above the door chimed softly, like a gentle promise that the road ahead would be shared this time, not traveled alone. And from that evening on, whenever the townsfolk saw the cowboy by Clara's side, they smiled quietly. Because in the wild, restless land of the West, two hearts had finally found their peace, one through a smile and the other through a kind forgiveness that turned into love.